Board. Okay, welcome to the grant writing workshop hosted by the Ottawa County Community Foundation. My name is Katie Kitchen, and I am the Director of Regional Affiliates for the Greater Salina Community Foundation. I have worked here at the foundation nearly 8 years and oversaw grants in my first few years, and then have handed that over to two talented people, and Jessica Fuller and Natalie Wood. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you all tonight. One piece of housekeeping is please keep yourself muted, but then if you do have a question, we'd love for you to either write in the chat or there's a lower number tonight, so if you just want to ask the question live and just unmute yourself and ask the question, go for it, because we really want to help as much as we can, and when numbers are smaller, it's really great to be able to provide individual help. So with that, if I'll start with Jessica Fuller, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll go on to Natalie, and then we'll get started.
Okay, hey everybody, my name is Jessica Fuller, and I am one of the Grants and Scholarship Coordinators. So just as my title shows, I help with grant applicants, organizations trying to apply. I also help on the scholarship side and work with students and counselors. And I have been with this wonderful place for 3 years. Okay, Natalie, you're up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Natalie Wood, and I am the other Grants and Scholarships Coordinator. We do the same duties pretty much, but I work specifically with the Ottawa County Community Foundation. So if you have any questions on a grant application or something that you're working on, feel free to call our office, talk to me, and I'll help you out as much as I can.
Okay, thanks. Well, the three of us are going to kind of work together tonight to introduce information this evening. What I will say is we are really going to start from the big picture on just kind of grant writing in general, and it'll be kind of like a funnel where we're going to come narrow and narrower and really talk specifically about the Ottawa County Community Foundation and different criteria specific to them, and actually look at Ottawa County Community Foundation's application. So just to get us started, why is your status important? We get this question or run into this quite a bit, and this has nothing to do with social media, but it actually has everything to do with who the IRS thinks you are. It is your tax status. Not all charities are created the same or get the same benefits of their status depending on how they have been organized. So it's important to know who you are. You can be a nonprofit but not be a 501c3 nonprofit. You might actually be a 501c6 or a C12 or some other. There's, I think, about 30 different C designations, or you may be a for-profit entity. It's important to know who you are, because that is the first step, because there are many funders that will only fund certain types of organizations. For instance, the Dane G. Hansen Foundation, it's a private foundation, will only fund 501c3 organizations or organizations that have a similar designation. So, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. So it's important to know who you are. If you are not a 501c3, another great thing that you can be is a church, school, or government entity. Those, in regards to the IRS, they look at that as each one of those entities are serving the common good and the community at large. And so because of that, we can award grants, or an organization can award grants to those entities just the same as a 501c3. Now, not every funder will support churches. Not every funder will support government. So you really want to know who you are and what your tax designation is. For anything that is a nonprofit or a charity, you will have what's called a letter of determination somewhere that will say this tax ID number with this tax ID number is linked to a 501c whatever you are. It's important to have that documentation because there are some funders that require you to submit that with your application. If you don't have a copy, it's okay. You can request a new one or a copy from the IRS. So just make sure you know what that where that is. So if you're not a public charity, it's okay, but you're actually, I'm going to back up a minute. So if you're not a 501c3 church, school, or government, what you have to know then is for a funder that says, hey, we will grant to things not that aren't one of those. So if you're a chamber of commerce, for instance, we at the Community Foundation have said, hey, we know Chamber of Commerce's, while they're not a 501c3, we know they do good community work and we want to help them. The limitation we have as a funder is this chamber as a 501c6 has to ask for something that is charitable in nature, that is meeting the community good. We cannot help the chamber with operational expenses because by their nature, we can't make a grant to them for operations. Okay, so it's important that if you're not one of those 4 entities to really think about what you're asking a funder for. If they say, hey, we'll support you, we just can't support your operations. Okay, so if you don't have a status, so we have groups that are not formalized, that it's a group of community members that are just really passionate and want to do a good thing for the community. Cool. We need a tax ID number in order to make a grant to an entity because that's our way to track and it's what our auditors look at to see what our grant making has done. So if you don't have, if you are the example of just a group of people that have passion and want to do something, find a fiscal agent, find an organization, preferably a 501c3 church, school, or government, because those are going to be the better options for you just in funding options or available funding for those organizations, and see if they will not be your fiscal sponsor. What that means, though, is that entity becomes the applicant to, for instance, the Community Foundation. So if I went to my local church and said, I have this really great idea to help the community, would you sponsor this and be our fiscal agent? The church has to agree to apply and then be financially responsible for that grant. Okay, so it's important to know that whether you're formalized or not formalized. Okay, if your organization is already in our system, so if you go to apply and you put in the tax ID number for your church and it says it's already in the system, that's because we limit how many of the same organization is listed 10 times. And so all you have to do is call our office and Natalie will help get you set up and added to the profile that's in the system for your church. The other thing to keep in mind, and you're going to hear this a lot from me today, is in order to do that, if the grants are due, on the 15th of the month and it's a Saturday, don't wait till Saturday to start your application. Start early, turn in early, because then you don't have the mad panic that, holy crap, I can't apply now because I waited till the last minute and now no one is available to help me at Saturday at 3 p.m. So just keep that in mind to, if you're planning on working on an application, to really start early and work ahead. Okay, so we now know who we are. We are a lovely 501c3. I have my letter of determination. I know what my tax ID number is, and I have an idea for a project. Now what do I do? So you can look for funders outside of what like the Community Foundation has to offer There are some paid options through GuideStar or Foundation Center. There are other resources that you can find for grants. Anymore, there used to be some free options I used to talk about, and those have all gone to be paid for. So some of it is depending on how much if you have $1 million project you're working on in your community, and you're going to have to apply for a lot of grants to make it, it might be worth it to pay for one of these services to find other funding. If your project is something that through local donations and maybe a decent grant from the local community foundation that you can get done, well, in that case, it doesn't really make sense to pay for one of these. So regardless of who you find that you think is a good fit, the first thing I tell people to do is look and read their website. What are they talking about? What are they celebrating? And their social media, if they have any, that's another good place to look, because that helps you understand what are the things that make this group excited. And that can signal you if your project is doing a big playground improvement and you see post after post about different things involving kids and getting them active and outdoors that this funder is celebrating that they've helped do, you've probably found a really good fit for your project. Okay. Then the next step is to look at grant criteria. So with grant criteria, it actually comes from donors. So each funder that's created has been created from either one person or a group of people giving to create either its own entity or a fund within a big entity like the Community Foundation to support projects. An entity like a funder like the Community Foundation, we are obligated to follow what the donor requested, or we agreed with the donor when we accepted their donation. Otherwise, we won't get donations again because no one will trust that we're honoring what their requests or what they'd like us to do. So keep in mind that that criteria is the purpose of the funding agent. And if they are a good funder, they will not deviate from that purpose. It displays what we want to accomplish or buy. And so think about it as saying, I've gone to the grocery store planning certain meals that I am going to cook, and these are the ingredients that I need to do that. Well, I'm not going to buy eggs, and bacon when I'm planning on making pancakes. So you have to make sure that it fits what they're trying to do. The funding agent's granting ability is limited to that. And you want to make sure to review all criteria, because just because you fit one point on the criteria, you may not fit all. And there may be one bullet point that limits your ability to qualify for that funding. So make sure you're very clear on all criteria and that you fit each piece of that. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Natalie, and she's going to talk specifically about the Ottawa County Community Foundation and their grants that they have available.
Okay, thanks, Katie. All right, so I'm going to talk about grant funding. And basically, like Katie was explaining, Ottawa County Community Foundation has multiple funds set up by the various donors. Think of the funds as different buckets of money to pull from when they are awarding grants. So each fund or bucket has its own criteria to follow. Now, the good news for you is that you only have to fill out one application, and then the Community Foundation's board will determine which funds they can pull from if your grant is awarded. So we're going to briefly talk about each type of fund. Health funds are used to protect and promote the health and well-being of the residents in Ottawa County. The Dangy Hansen Community Grant Funds support non-operational projects and are meant to improve the community. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those two coming up. The Ottawa County Impact Fund has the least amount of criteria and can be used for the widest range of projects. So it's great to have that fund available. There are also 3 community funds, one for Bennington, one for Tescott, and one for Delphus. These funds are earmarked for each community and can only support charitable projects in each of these communities. It's a wonderful resource available each year, every year, and we would love to see these grant funds get used. So we're going to break down a couple of these funds a little bit more. We'll start with health funds, as they're often the hardest to give away. So as you see on the slide, health dollars are meant to support healthy lifestyles, behaviors, and environments. They support preventative measures and do not help someone who is already ill. And the best way to describe health funds are to give you some examples of some projects that have happened in your area. So recently, the Minneapolis Recreation Commission received a grant for pickleball equipment to go with new courts that are being built there. Pickleball can be played by multiple ages, so this is an example of encouraging healthy lifestyles. Another great example of this is like playground equipment in a park or at the school. Definitely want to encourage that. An example of a project supporting healthy behaviors is Central Kansas Mental Health Center receiving funding for a suicide education and prevention project. This also relates to the points listed above, as it supports preventative measures and increases health awareness through education. And finally, a fun example of healthy environments is USD 240's Bennington Grade School Kindergarten. So this grant purchased a tower garden to use in a kindergarten classroom. The students are getting to learn about science, health, and nutrition, all with hands-on gardening lessons right in their classroom. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that project once it's all complete. So as you can see, there's a variety of projects that meet the criteria for health funds. It's a little more limiting than some of our other funds, but there really is a wide variety that counts. Okay, now we'll talk about the Dane G. Hansen Community Grant Funds. The Dane G. Hansen Foundation, as Katie mentioned, is another foundation, and it gave money to Ottawa County to use for grants. The local community foundation board makes the decision of how to use this bucket of money. So the Hansen Community Grant Fund covers a lot of territory with 6 areas of concentration: education, healthcare, conservation and environment, arts and culture, community beautification, and community social services and security. So examples of some projects that could receive Hansen dollars are additional resources for students in the schools, safety equipment for firefighters or EMS, updates to community buildings, park improvements, community events, and more. It really does cover a wide area, but there are some important things to remember with these funds. First of all, preference goes to projects that show community involvement and volunteerism. What does that mean? Basically, you will want to list collaboration if there are multiple groups working together. For instance, say a community group wants to plant flowers downtown, and various high school groups are going to take turns watering the flowers each week. We want to put that in the application. Also, how much of the project will be done by volunteers? Do you have a volunteer committee planning your project? Do you have volunteers serving at an event? Things like that. Now, we have had some projects that are like renovations, and you had to have groups had to hire a professional to do that. Well, maybe the professional is doing the work, but your volunteers are coming in and doing the cleanup the debris after the renovation is done, or providing the upkeep afterwards. So any way that you can show community involvement or volunteerism, there are places in the application to fill that out, and we only know what you tell us. So definitely list that and explain as well as you can. Skipping ahead on this slide, grants cannot be used for operational expenses, which Katie touched on. This money does not pay for salaries, office equipment, or anything that is part of your annual operating budget. But going back to that middle point, grants shall not reduce or replace budgetary needs for programs or projects that are tax supported. And Katie, I'm going to have you jump in to speak a little more about this if you can.
Sure. We've sometimes had confusion on this because we've had a school or city read that and then say, well, I don't think I can apply because, you know, everything we do is on a budget. That's part of our legal obligation as a tax supported entity and things. Well, what this is really saying is things that, the curriculum for the school, our tax dollars should pay for that. Infrastructure on the building to keep the building going, our tax dollars should be paying for that. But if there's a teacher or the school in general that wants to build on the educational opportunities or access that their students have, that there is above and beyond anything our tax dollars would pay for, that would qualify. The example on the previous slide with the kindergarten, that obviously is above and beyond anything that our tax dollars would pay for. And that's just a creative idea and problem solving that teacher had to apply for that. And so that absolutely would qualify for funding from this fund as well. Also with government, this funding will not pay to resurface streets or replace sidewalks that just have, been deferred maintenance for too long. But if you're doing a playground improvement at the city park and the park never had sidewalks and you want to put in an ADA sidewalk to go to the playground so that more people have access, that is something beyond what the city was ever capable of doing before or will do going forward. So you just have to think creatively. And with these criteria, on the previous slide that talked about the impact fund and the community funds, those are really unrestricted dollars that really can go to any charitable purpose in the community. But the more things that you can qualify in these funding sources increases your likelihood of being funded, because with a grant application that, well, it qualifies for healthy living and, well, it would qualify for this community grant fund, and I'm from Delphus and there's money earmarked specifically for Delphus, it really actually makes it a lot easier to be funded because there's a lot of different choices that the board can make with that. So
Thank you. Okay, I think I've got one more slide. Okay, so now you have an idea of how the donors want their funds to be used. And so this is where you stop and ask yourself if your application matches the donor's goals. If you feel the answer is yes, then start working on that application. The sooner the better. Just like mentioned earlier, we can help you answer questions if you work on it the day, farther than the day before the deadline. But if your answer is no after you've heard this, then this might not be the right grant opportunity for your organization. So you just have to consider that. And Jessica, I'll let you take over.
Okay. Okay, so now that we've determined if our project meets the fund criteria, we get to start the planning of it. And I always recommend planning all the details of your project before you start filling out the application. This is where you're going to break down the who, what, when, where, and how, and why. Because in our application, we ask those questions. So if you fill out the who, what, when, and where, and why while you're planning it, it will help you have a more complete application, a more well-rounded application that a community foundation board member would be able to follow and review. When you are creating your plan, I always recommend interviewing people that will be impacted by your project. So let's say we're building a playground, and the fun part about building a playground is thinking about all the equipment you get to put in. So you might want to think about swings and the slides and everything. Was I muted the whole entire time? That's awesome. I'm sorry about that, guys.
You just muted yourself just now, so.
Oh, it shows me as unmute.
Yeah, you are now, but you muted just for a second there.
Oh, well, it's my lovely keyboard, so just keeping it interesting for you all. Okay. Well, I just want to tell you about, if we were building I always have the example of putting together a playground. And when we're mapping out our who, what, when, where, how, and why, we want to also interview the individuals that are being impacted, because you never know how someone's going to be impacted until you ask them and see it from their eyes. So we're building this playground. We're talking about, first thing you think about is the equipment, but we might also want to interview the parents, and see what would they like to see in a playground. And they might say benches or covered shelters or a bathroom that's nearby. And these may be things you didn't even think about. You can interview the neighbors of the that'll be around the park, and how are they going to be impacted by the increased traffic, and by the kids playing around. And this, by getting this, you can be able to add. It just kind of helps beef up your application and shows the ripple effects one project can have. Again, as you are planning this out, you want to stay familiar with the criteria and make sure that your project's goal aligns with the funder's goal. And I always say, even use the same language. The health fund is preventative. Put that word in there. If you're doing a community beautification project and, use the word community beautification in there, that will kind of make a light bulb moment for the evaluators to go, oh, that could possibly be Hanson, qualify for that, and just kind of helps maybe increase your chance there. And then Katie's going to jump in real quick about things to consider.
Sure. So there are just some items that are kind of the things that we hear a lot during the review process when evaluators are looking at grant applications, and also it just helps improve your application. The first thing that we hear a lot is what kind of partnerships or collaboration, and what that could mean is some examples Natalie gave about partnering with another entity to provide volunteerism. It may be that other organizations are partnering financially with your organization, but you just want to think about how, because the more collaboration that happens, the more likely a project is to succeed, because there are multiple people helping make that happen. And the Community Foundation and many other funders want to invest in things they think are likely to succeed and continue on if it's a project that continues on. Also, your budget. It's important to think about very clearly what's on your budget. Jessica will be covering this in more detail later, but what I will say is anytime you go to a store, you walk out of that store with a receipt that tells you exactly what you've purchased and how much it costs. While the Community Foundation doesn't want to know how much every single nail in your, community center renovation costs, they do want to know what the big ticket items are costing, and just overall how much is in materials, how much is in labor, how much are the different little pieces, so that they can make a more informed decision when they're determining one, approval, and then how much to approve. And it can really be the make or break of a group getting 10% of what they're asking for or 90%. Also, have a clear purpose. I can't tell you how many applications that I started reading, and I read how much they were asking for and read the first couple sections of the project description and the definition of need, okay, of the why you need to do it, and then would have to go and open the budget to know what they're asking us to do, because I had no idea. And I wasn't the only one. The evaluators that are volunteers would have to do that too. And you don't want people within the first 2 sentences of your application. We should know very clearly what you want. Then you can go into all the details, but just think of it as putting things in order of importance. Tell us what it is first, and then you can give us the supporting information. But we need to know, so we have that context, so then all the other information makes sense. Also, outline how it benefits the community. This is particularly important if you're not one of those Magic 4 organizations, if you're not a 501c3. It's even more important that you explain and outline how this project benefits the community, because you are not a entity that by its nature we can give a grant to unless you've proven that you are doing something charitable, which means, i.e., benefiting the community. Also, every application of every place that I've ever seen is going to ask you for measurable results. And what that means is, how do we know that it failed or succeeded? We're not asking for things to be, we don't live in a perfect world, and we're not asking for things to be always work out, but we want to know how you know if it did or not. And so, while people smiling is lovely and people being happy because you put new park equipment in, great. But how does that measure anything? Does it mean that you're going to have increased activities at the park? Like, are you going to study the usage over, 2 Saturdays and a weekday prior to applying, and then going to do the same thing after to measure if there's an increase in usage? Are you going to take, informal polls to see if you're pulling people from other communities to the park now and never did that before? That's measurable information. And then how you're going to evaluate, which means, okay, I've gathered this information. What are the distinctive points that I have as goals that I would say means that we succeeded or not? Okay. I think with that, yep, I will pass it back over to Jessica. And yeah.
Okay. So to kind of piggyback on what Katie was just saying, you want to target a specific ask, okay? And you don't want to have the community foundation board guessing at what your project's going to be, guessing what your goals are. You know how your project's going to impact the community. You can see the need, and so you need to write the application so that the community foundation board can clearly see it through your eyes. Okay. And with that, it helps having a specific ask or target specific project. So if we're doing that playground, and if we went to them and asked, hey, and your first ask is the complete project, okay, from doing the groundwork to the sign at the end. And that's a $30,000 ask. And if you go there and you say, hey, my project's $30,000, but I'm only going to ask $3,000 from you, the community foundation board has no idea what part of the project their money's going towards, or is that $3,000 going to be the beginning or at the end? And so they don't really know how are they investing in this project. And so if you have a big project like that, you might need to break it down into phases. So phase one, I'm going to come to the foundation and ask, hey, we're doing phase one of the playground. My 3,000, we're just asking 3,000. That's specifically going to go to mulch and border. Okay. So when the community foundation board reviews it, they go, okay, I can see exactly how our money is going to be used. I know what the plan is. They've thought about the timeline, and I think they can do it. There's no guessing. You've told them exactly how you plan on using it. You tell them the timeline. And so that, again, is why it's also important to review the criteria, because as you're telling them, and if it doesn't really fit the funder, that's not the funder's goals, that's not what the funder likes to fund, then it might not be a good place to go. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now I want to dive in a little bit deeper into Ottawa County's application. And in here, we ask for SMART goals. And the reason why we ask for SMART goals, because it's just another way to to relay what your project is to the Community Foundation board. It breaks it down. Everybody learns differently. Everybody takes information in differently. So this is just a different way that you can state your project. So SMART goals stands for, is an acronym. And there's a really good resource at smartsheets.com. If you go there, it has a great worksheet that kind of helps you break this down and helps you out plan your project. So S is for specific. And this is your goal of the project, okay? This is where you get to tell the Community Foundation Board what the project is, and it gets them in the mindset, okay? This is where you put your clear ask. M is measurable. How are you going to determine if you've met your goal? Again, smiles do not work. We don't want smiles, even though it's nice to get that from your project. We don't want the feel goods or the high fives. I want something measurable and tangible. If your project is bigger, you might have milestones. At this point, we hope to reach this many people. At this point, we hope to have this part of the project done. A stands for achievable. How are you going to complete the goal? Do you have the tools to get this done? Do you need to work with other organizations in your community? Use their time or their resources to help you complete the goal. R is for relevant, and this is a big one. How does it fit the need in the community? How did you determine that need? And how does it fit the mission of your organization or the group that you're working with? And T stands for time bound. What's your timeline? Is it realistic? And so, Katie, let's jump over to this example I have. That's, oh, okay. Well, I thought I had an example in here, but never mind. But it just kind of would break it down for you. Okay, so let's jump over to the budget then. On the budget, I'm going to show you, it should be in here, right? The good and bad budget. Is that coming up, Katie? Okay, so I'm going to go over each of these bullets here of a good and bad budget. So let's see our next slide. Okay, here is going to be our bad example. So, like I was saying earlier, when we're doing a budget, we don't want to have our foundation, Community Foundation board members guessing. You want to tell them exactly how you plan on spending that money. So when we look here at this budget, this is for the green tea drinkers, and they want to promote the benefits of drinking green tea. So here we look, we have the supplies, and that is, it says $1,000. Okay, that's great. But what are the supplies? Is it teacups? Is it sandwiches? Is it a lot of napkins? We don't know. So you just leave in the Community Foundation board to guess. Same with marketing. It's $500. Does that goes towards radio ads, newspaper? Is that passing flyers out Main Street? We just don't know. And then on the Community Foundation request, here they did put the 1,500 there, which was good. But we don't also, they might have talked about volunteer in their application or other collaborators, but it's not shown in here. You want to be able to, if there's anything monetary value that you wrote about in your application, you want to be able to reflect that into your in your budget. Okay, so Katie, let's go look at a good budget. Okay, so here we have a good budget, and I'm going to tell you why this is a good budget. When we first look at it, it looks like the itemized receipt that Katie was talking about. They took the big ticket items and they separated it out so you can see the exact cost of things. So the marketing on here, oh, I know what they're doing. They're developing a sightseeing map, so I know specifically what that marketing is. We know what the printing cost is. They show the volunteer hours. And then down below on our project revenue, you see all their collaborations. You see that they have gone to other organizations or funders and asked for money. So they didn't come with an empty hand. And I want to go through each of those buckets real quick. So on the project revenue, you have 4 buckets you can fill out. First is the secured funds, and that is funding that you already have. These are your grant applications that are already approved. You would list it here in this column. The next 4 is the applied for, and this is going to be your ask. My biggest mistake here is people will put the total project expense instead of just what the community foundation requests. Now, sometimes the the total project expense is how much they're asking for, but a lot of times be like, this is a $30,000, but they're only asking 3 from the foundation. So just make sure that number matches what you put into the grant application at the very beginning. And again, any other application or funders that you've asked and you haven't heard back, if you received it, any kind of pending grants, you would put in the applied for bucket. You have your earned bucket, which is your fees, sales, and ticket sales. And then you have your in kind, which is your volunteer labor. Now, this is the column that we hear a lot about in our application, but not a lot of people will put that in the budget. And we might have to go back on a previous slide. We have there's a resource that we have for you that helps you determine what the volunteer labor is. Oh, you're muted, Katie.
I thought I unmuted myself. It's not on this slide. I neglected to put it on there. It is called, I think it's
independentsector.org.
Yeah, independentsector.org.
Can you put that in the chat section so people will be able to see that?
I will put that in there, and it helps tell you can put in Kansas and it will tell you what the value of volunteer labor is that you can put in. So
awesome. The other big thing too here is that for that volunteer labor, they put it in the projected expenses and the revenue. Okay, I don't want to just see it in the revenue. I want to see it in the total project expenses. And we all want to balance budget, and so our total project expenses have to equal our total project revenue. Okay, that's one of the big things we look at. Now, by submitting early, Natalie's going to look at this, and if she sees something that doesn't add up, I even had one time they forgot to list the item they're asking for on the budget. Okay, so if we don't see that, then Natalie can give you a call or email you and say, hey, something's not adding up correctly on your budget, and she can help you with that. Okay. Okay, is there any questions at all? You can, if you don't feel comfortable talking, you can put it in the chat section too. Any questions so far? Nope. Oh, we lost our lights. There we go. They're on sensors, so we've just been sitting here for too long. Okay, let's do the next slide, Katie. Okay, so now we're going to look at a grant application. This is Ottawa's grant application, and so I'm not going to hit every single question, so don't worry. I'm just going to hit the big ones that we get a lot of questions on. Okay, so first up, let's go look at amount requested. This is how you're going to put your ask amount. This amount needs to match what's in your budget. Okay. Next, we have the project summary. This is where you're going to put your specific ask. If a community foundation board, after reading this one box, the project summary, if they don't understand what you're asking, you didn't do it right. Okay, so they should have an idea of what you're asking just by this one brief summary. In the project description, this is going to be your what of your when you did your who, what, when, where, and why on your planning. This is where you're going to put your what section. This is where you're going to put your full details of your project. And in the need, definition of need, this is where you're going to put your why. Why is it important? How does it going to affect your community or your organization? And the biggest thing, that last question, why is it important to fund this project now? Okay. Ottawa has a grant cycle in the fall and in the spring. And I'm looking here real quick, and I actually have one open right now. And so you need to tell them, hey, I need funding now in the spring, and that's not something that can wait for the fall one. So that's why it's important. Okay, let's jump over to, we're going to scroll down to our project start date.
Before we go on to that point, can I just say, we do get people say, well, I keep repeating myself in the application. And it's because a lot of times, for instance, they've put their what and their why in the project description. And then they get to the definition need, which is the why, and they're like, well, now I got to repeat myself. And so just try to limit even if you have all the information in your head, if you really try to limit your answer to just what's being asked in that box, then you won't feel like you're repeating yourself and writing a bunch of stuff that isn't necessary.
Yes, good point. Thank you. Okay, well, there we go. Okay, project start date. If your project has already started, what you're asking for, okay, you've already started, you cannot apply. We cannot fund debt, okay? So if we're building this playground and you've already broken ground on it, you cannot ask for grant funding, okay? So it's important to know your community foundation's grant cycles when it is. So currently, Ottawa County, it opened on February 1st, and all applications it's due April 1st, okay? So your project, let's say you're applying, you want to apply for this cycle, has to start after April, okay? Completion date.
I'm going to add to that that also the board is not going to meet the day after the grant cycle closes. So really your project needs to start even little after, a few weeks after the deadline is great, or, if it starts a month after, perfect, just otherwise I'm going to call and say, well, are you spending all that money before the board meets? Because they have to decide based on projects that have not even begun yet.
Thanks, Natalie. And then your project completion date is just your estimation of when we'll get that done. You are to spend, if you are awarded, you are to spend your funding within 1 year of your award date. The next section is your SMART goals. We ask that you list up to 3 goals. Only 1 is required, but you can list up to 3. And then I want to scroll down to the budget section, Katie, next.
Sure, and I did find that example of SMART goals. So if you wanted me to share that
let's
right
do
now.
it. I think it's great to have examples. It's easy for you to jump to.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know about you guys, but I sometimes need an example to help things just kind of click better in my mind. So I wanted to give you this example here. I chose this one because they break down their project really well. And again, remember, SMART goals is another way for you to express what your project is. Here we have Catholic Charities in Northern Kansas, and you can see by reading project goal number 1 exactly what they're asking. They're planning to provide 50 unique households in Mitchell County between April 1st and March 31st. And you can see exactly what they are planning what services they're planning to provide. They broke it down to 150 food boxes, 150 hygiene kits, and also hoping to help support rent and utilities assistance too. Okay, then we have the measurement section. And again, they're not using smiles or that they helped all these wonderful people, but they're using a software to do it. But most importantly about the data is that they're going to review that data monthly and annually, and then that's going to help determine if they've met their goal. Now, Catholic Charities Northern Kansas is a bigger organization, so I'm not expecting everybody to have a software. You don't need that to track if your grant or your project or program is successful. You can use an Excel spreadsheet, a Google Docs or Google Sheets, I think is what it's called. You can use something like that. And then the timeline. They break it down so you can see exactly when they'll be visiting your community. In April is when they're going to determine how many items they're going to do. And then starting in May, they're going to visit Beloit, fourth Wednesday of the month, and then do that all throughout the grant year. So they just broke it down really nicely, and just kind of gave the Community Foundation Board another way just to see how what they plan on doing with the money. Okay, let's go back to that budget portion of the application if you're able to. Okay, real quick, stop right here. Now, under possible fund options, this is where Natalie was talking about community funds. If your project specifically or benefits only one of these communities, it's important for you to mark that. Okay, so then because again, there's funds earmarked just for those communities. Again, and then stop right here real quick. If you guys are wondering, okay, what does Hanson define as arts and culture? In our application, we do a quick definition of each subcategory they have. And then as she's scrolling down, you'll be able to see where you are going to be able to state why you feel like you fit the these sub areas, or they call them area details. And you can state this is our community volunteerism and involvement. Okay. Sorry, I tell you to one thing and I keep stopping you. Okay, right here, minimum request. So in the budget section, you're going to be able to, there's 3 options for you to choose, okay? And we list these 3 options. The first one says choices under minimum request. It says, yes, I will accept any amount. And this is stating that, okay, my ask is 3,000, but our project can continue on with any amount that you give us, okay? The second choice is yes, but there's a minimum amount required to proceed, okay? So what that is telling our Community Foundation Board is that, and then you would enter the amount. Let's say your ask is for 3,000, but I must have 1,500 to proceed. You would say, that's when you would mark yes, but there's a minimum amount required to proceed. And what that's saying is that you have to have 1,500 in order for your project to pass go. Or if you have no, I will not accept a reduced amount, you're just saying, nope, I needed 3,000. Our project cannot get going. Our program cannot start without that 3,000. This is important because it helps the Community Foundation Board know how much they can fund, and because they want to fund things that that will get off the ground. Don't want to fund money and then just have it returned. So we want you to be honest. But if you can say yes, I will accept any amount, that's the thing I recommend choosing. But if your project cannot go without a minimum amount, then that's when you would enter that. Any questions on that portion? Okay. Now on the budget, I did fail to mention that we provide a project budget form Excel spreadsheet that you have to use. So you must use our budget form when completing the application. You just download the budget right out of the application, fill it out, and then upload it back in your application. Dates when funds are needed. This is where you're going to let us know about the approximate time when you need the funding for your project. We put a note in here that if you are awarded, you will receive funding 6 to 8 weeks after the application deadline. Natalie kind of spoke to that already. It's because the grant committee or Community Foundation Board does not meet the day after the deadline. They need time to review all their applications. They could be getting 20 different applications, so they need time to review them. They need time to determine the recipient, and then there'll be some follow-up forms that we'll be asking from you if you are awarded. Okay, I believe you're up, Katie. Unless there's more that I don't realize.
Okay. Did I share the PowerPoint again? I think I did.
You did wonderful.
I've been back and forth a few times, so now I'm feeling a little confused. Okay, so I'm just going to close this out to talk about some other grant writing tips that can just help you in general, whether you're applying to the Community Foundation or another resource. I believe it was Jessica who talked about this a little bit earlier, but use the funders language. If they've talked about healthy lifestyles and environments in their grant criteria, or you've seen a social media post where they're celebrating how they've gotten kids active and use certain buzzwords around that, use those words in your application, because whether it's consciously or subconsciously, you are connecting how your project just fits completely in sync with that funder and what their criteria is. Also, read your application out loud to yourself, because guess what? You'll find a lot of errors, because if you're like me, my brain works a lot faster than my fingers can type, and I inevitably leave words out or do weird things because my brain's already moved on and I forgot to type the word. And so really read it out loud to yourself, because that will help clean up an application. My mom is a grant writer, and she gave me advice. We gave another presentation of this last week for another foundation. And, she told me beforehand, she's like, Katie, tell them it's the best advice. The cream rises to the top. And what she means by that, if you've written a really well-written, thought-out application, you're going to rise to the top on your own, regardless of what kind of project you're at, what your project is, because a lot of people don't take that kind of time. Also, have someone else read the application. My mom has me read her applications, and I write notes and questions because she is so ingrained into her organization that she works for that she makes assumptions in her writing because she just knows it so well. Well, for me, who is not ingrained, I don't get it. What do you mean here? How do you mean? And if you have someone, it doesn't have to be anyone who's ever written a grant, but you just need, because most of the people evaluating grants have a lot of times never written one themselves. So you need a lay person to be able to read what your project and what you're trying to do. And if they have no questions, you've probably written a pretty clean, clear application. If they do have questions, it means you have holes. And if your friend has asked you a question, you better believe the board members on that review committee will have the same questions. Another big one is acronyms and jargon. Teachers and medical people are the worst about this, of using phrases. I mean, I literally was just on a webinar about rural healthcare earlier this afternoon with the Kansas Hospital Association and some other groups that are talking about the future of rural healthcare. And I can't tell you how many different acronyms were used during that webinar. And I was lost part of the time because they made assumptions that they were talking only to medical people. But there's a lot of others, me included, that serve these rural areas. We provide grants to health organizations, and they lost me at parts, which is, I'm not a person you want to lose because I'm an amazing advocate for rural healthcare. So same goes for your grant application. It's okay to use an acronym, one, maybe two tops in your application, but you got to follow the old English standard. I mean, I work for the Greater Salina Community Foundation. That's a whole heck of a lot of mouthful just saying it, let alone writing the thing out. And so write it out once and then use your little brackets and put GSCF right after. And then you could use GSCF in the rest of your application. But you just want to just be very careful of how much you do that, because people will start getting confused. And if they have to go back and refer to, okay, what did that acronym mean? You're going to lose people. So be just very careful. The other piece I always say is to tell a story from your heart. And you don't have to have an exciting proposal or plan or project to not have an exciting, you can still have an exciting ask. There's a couple examples I will use. I had an individual in a community that was asking for new tables and chairs for senior center. That's not like real feel good. Do you know what I mean? Like just on the surface of it, it's new tables and chairs. Okay, so what? Honestly, that applicant really touched your heart about how the value that her senior volunteers were in setup and tear down, and how her fear of these old chairs and that they've had some break with individuals in them and the risk that those people were taking, and the pride that the seniors that used her facility would have in having this new equipment that then they could feel pride about renting out their space to other groups that would ultimately give them more revenue and then sustain them for a longer period of time. I mean, that is a lot easier for someone to get behind versus, well, our tables and chairs are old and we need new ones. And I can promise you, because I read them, that Jessica and Natalie have read applications like that too. The other one, so it may not be something that kind of tugs at your heart or does something that makes you feel an emotion of like, oh, but you can do something fun. My first year working here. So, I mean, I have read hundreds of applications between the one I'm going to talk about today. I still remember the title of that application. It was Save the Corn, Raccoons Not Wanted. And the entire application was about wanting solar powered electrical fencing for their community garden because it had been ravaged by raccoons year after year. And the entire application was about these invaders coming in, and they had to keep the invaders out so that they could help the good people of the community. I mean, it was hilarious. And I mean, I laughed out loud once or twice. So, and you know, I'm not funny really very much and can't write funny at all. So that would not be my wheelhouse, but it might be yours. So just think about ways that you can make your application interesting. Finally, submit early. Submit early, submit early, submit early. I mean, I hope you go to sleep thinking submit early. I tell people all the time, some funders, they don't help you. You turn in, it wouldn't matter how early you turned in. It is what it is. And you're just part of the group and they're going to review, take it for what it is. And you hope you're a great one. For funders like us, if you submit early and there's something wrong with your application, or we have questions, like we read your applications like this doesn't really make sense, we will actually give you an opportunity to fix it. So, and there are other funders like us out there. So think about that. If the applications are due on the 15th, maybe just for your own sake, put in the 8th as the due date and that you submit a week early. Because then if the reviewer has, the staff who reviews it has questions, you've given them the opportunity to give you the opportunity to submit a better application. Ask yourself, how will your grant application stand out from the rest? You have to remember funders. I mean, in a low year, the Ottawa County Community Foundation Board is reviewing 15 to 20 applications, 12 to 15, depending. In a big cycle, they might be reading 30. And there are other funders that are like in the hundreds. So you want to try to figure out a way that you stand out and are memorable. Because I can tell you, when I've read 30 applications and then it gets to the point where they're talking about, I have to go, okay, which one was that one? Because you've read so many, but there are certain ones that you always remember because they were memorable. So how can you be memorable? So you've done all the things and written a great application. Unfortunately, there's never enough grant funding to meet all the community needs. when I started with the Community Foundation 8 years ago, we were really excited to give $10,000 and $15,000 away because that's what we had. And it was awesome to give that amount of money away. We are now giving 10 times that money away, and it's still not enough. It won't ever be enough, and because there's just a lot of need and people have awesome ideas. And so understand that just because you're denied, don't give up. Okay? One no is not a never. It's just a no right now. So please consider applying again, because sometimes it just means we happen to have the cycle that we had 30 applications and we had $50,000 to give away and there was $20,000 in requests. Well, we can't say yes to everybody, unfortunately. We would love to just be able to give money away, helter skelter, but we can't. So that's one. Another thing to consider, there are some funders that will do this and some won't, but consider calling the staff of the organization and say, is there anything that wasn't clear or that you could improve on for the next time? Some will actually give you feedback, others won't, but it never hurts to ask, okay? And then find other resources. And some of this, the North Central Regional Planning, they office out of Beloit, but they serve Ottawa County and many of the counties in this region, can help you. They might even be willing to read your application for you. The other thing to consider is, did I ask the foundation to fund 100% of my project? And they said no. Well, maybe I need to shake a few trees or do some things that if I have a $10,000 request, whether it's through volunteerism or getting some donations, I'm going to try to find a little money. So the next time I go and ask, I'm not coming with an empty hand. So that's another thing to try to do. Maybe you didn't have any collaborators. So think about trying to find someone to partner with to bolster your request. Okay, just some other things to talk about. We use an online application process, and you can find information and how to apply through the Ottawa County CF.org, their website.
Real quick, Katie.
Yep.
Do you see where that? I wanted to point out to get to the application. You click on the link that orange arrow is pointing to, and that will take you to our online grant portal. You would, if you're a new applicant, you create an account, and then you will find the Ottawa County Community Foundation application. If you're a returning applicant, then you just click on this link and log back into your account. Okay, go ahead, Katie.
Yes. Awesome. That's great information. There's also some tools for applying of like frequently asked questions. There's tutorials. There's some other information. So if you have questions, you can look at that as well. Also, another thing that people don't always keep in mind, if you're awarded a grant, you will be required to turn in a grant report. And the grant report is awesome because we actually want you to tell us about what you did, and pictures of smiling people are great. So while we in the application didn't want to hear about the people are going to be super happy and smiling and high-fiving, if they're doing that in some photos because they're super excited, we love that because we're going to use that in publications to talk about your project, which just gives you more press for your organization or your project. So don't forget to submit your report, and it's due within 30 days of the completion of your project. So the system will send you automatic reminders to do that, but don't forget to do that. Don't forget to take some awesome photos with people enjoying whatever you've done. If you're not a school, church, government, or 501c3, so the 4 special ones, if you're not one of those, it's fine, but we will need receipts. Because we have to show that you did what you said you were going to do, because you're not considered a tax deductible nonprofit. Okay.
I'm going to also add here real quick, Katie, that on the grant reports, obviously we want you to do your project at the time you said, get your grant report in 30 days, but life happens sometimes. Sometimes the supplier can't get the stuff to you when you thought you would. Please call our office. don't turn in a report just because you're panicked about the deadline. And so we haven't done this yet, but we will, and it'll be great. Just call and say, hey, can you give us a little extension? Unless you're going way beyond that year's point, we're going to help you out because we want to hear the story and we want to know, yes, these funds were used. You did a great job. We're excited for you too.
Thanks. That's a really great point. And the other thing to remember is, we want to work with you. I mean, COVID happened this year, and we had lots of people that applied to do some really cool things that we just automatically gave them extensions. Like, we didn't even hesitate. And because obviously it just is what it is sometimes. So yeah, I would agree with Natalie. We've had people turn in things that say, well, we'll get it done when we can. Well, no, because we won't count that and you'll have to do a report again. So just please, just to stay in communication with us if things don't necessarily go as planned. Okay, just to review, some high points of the application and the process, if you keep nothing else in mind. One, develop an idea and research and plan. Okay, having that plan makes it easier to decide whether or not, when you review funder criteria, if your plan fits that criteria or not. You also need to create SMART goals, so very specific, measurable plan for what your project is going to do or accomplish. Okay? Write a thoughtful, clear, and it's awesome if it's creative proposal. And then finally, proofread and submit early. Woo! Submit early. It's just will make such a difference for you, particularly with the Ottawa County Community Foundation. And then finally, if you're awarded, don't forget to write a timely report with pictures, because we love pictures. So with that, thank you very much. And we are here if you have questions at all. I do have my contact information, but for anything related to the Ottawa County Community Foundation, but for any grants or scholarship questions, Natalie's your girl. She it does a great job and she can help you. So we appreciate your time tonight, and thank you to the Ottawa County Community Foundation for bringing us tonight to present, and have a good evening.